Welcome back to the Upside. I have the unfortunate pleasure of speaking with a former host of
The Downside.
Yeah, the Downside. This is the show was canceled, but that's all right. No, it's a great pleasure to have my former colleague at LCTV. He's on sabbatical right now from his hosting duties, Jerold Duquette. Jerold, thanks for coming in.
Paul, I'm always happy to be with the only guy who's ever lost an election to Jerold Duquette.
That's it, and it'll never happen again. that was just not a good thing. But fortunately, what people don't remember is that Jerold keeps saying that I lost an election to him. But we did serve on the school committee together, and I drew the short straw. So I was the one that sat next to Jerold because no one else wanted to sit next to you. You knew that, right?
That's right. Yeah.
All right. So and we got along fabulously to the point where we irritated a lot of people because we liked each other.
It's true. It's
right?
a sad truth.
So Democrats didn't like Jerold because he's associated with a Republican. Republicans didn't like me because they're associated with Jerold. Well, there was other people that didn't like me because I associated with you. But that's
us, Paul. Let's be honest.
So unfortunately, we both have our coachy stickers on, which means that if he does lose, they're going to blame us.
Absolutely.
That's right.
But it also means that he has support across the spectrum.
That's right. Right, left, somewhere in the middle, hopefully, right?
Absolutely, that's right.
And you actually worked in the Hampden County House of Corrections.
I am a former correctional officer, yes.
A correctional officer. Just like Nick, you started at the lowest level.
Well, I was one of those per diem guys.
Oh, you were?
So
they didn't want you long term.
I was in college. No, I was not. They would never have trusted me with the responsibility of someone who went to the academy. I was just a per diem guy who did it every summer during college.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
But you got to know the people there.
I did, and I also worked on Capitol Hill for a member of Congress, and I noticed that there's a lot of similarities between working in the jail and working on Capitol
About
Hill.
who should be in.
Yeah, well,
that's
there are similar operations.
So now Jerold's a professor. But no, Jerold's a professor. I'm sorry. There's a question there somewhere.
Yeah.
But Jerold's a professor of political science.
I am.
All right, so what we're going to do today is this is where we're going to have some fun. You obviously follow the presidential races.
What?
You're obviously following that, aren't you?
What race?
There you go. That shows you why he's on a
President
public payroll. He's
He's
on a public payroll. But there's dynamics that are going on both sides of the races, Republican and Democrat, that, quite frankly, haven't been seen in a while, or have they? Because everybody says it's so different, but sometimes I tend to think that maybe it isn't. It's just there's different characters.
Well, that's actually an interesting observation. It is different than in the recent past, for sure.
Yep.
But it's not as if we've never had contentious nomination fights.
Correct.
Obviously, on the Republican side, it's incredibly different because we've never had a guy who has zero experience get the nomination for a major party. So that's, in and of itself, is extremely odd.
Right.
And the other interesting thing is that on the left, Senator Sanders is very different than any other candidate who's ever tried to win the nomination because, in a sense, he hasn't even been a Democrat. He's an independent guy in the Congress, right? So he is probably the most genuine insurgent, meaning trying to take over the party, that there's ever been, at least in a modern sense. So on the left, what we see is a fascinating attempt to take over a party, and on the right, what we see is, I would argue, probably the hijacking of a party.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to let that one go because I want to ask you a question that...
Well, you're supporting the nominee. I want to make it clear that Paul is supporting the nominee of his party.
Correct.
Then that is it.
Correct.
All right. I don't want you to be lumped in with the crazies.
Well,
yeah.
Okay. not today. Not today. But when you see the support that Bernie Sanders gets, and I've talked to some of his supporters, and I get where they're coming from. But do you think there's a lot of, because there's got to be some misunderstanding when a person says we're going to give you free college, and I know in this world we hear what we want to hear.
Sure.
We don't necessarily listen.
Sure.
Right? So great talking points. We're going to give you free college. Health care for everybody, although we do have it already, technically. So do you think that the voters really understand where Bernie's coming from, or is it just that, just like what they say about Donald Trump, is it that anger, or do they really understand, because to get free college, you really got to go way overboard in terms of spending.
Well, maybe that's true. That might well be true. I think there is a similarity in the sense that both candidates are what we call protest candidates. One of them succeeded in winning the nomination of his party, apparently, and the other never really had a chance to do that. His positions don't really reflect the mainstream of the Democratic Party. Right, and while he's received lots of support from young people and he's filled stadiums, he hasn't actually won, and he's losing pretty decisively. So the interesting thing on the Bernie Sanders side is that he is really pushing for something other than being elected president. He's genuinely pushing to move the political debate, the dialogue, as far to the left as he can.
Don't you find that, well, my perspective is that you have Donald Trump who talks and says what he feels, and it comes out.
Sometimes,
right?
it's better not to say what you feel.
No, but there's really not a big filter.
And I'm glad
there,
you
right?
said as he feels.
Right, but there's not
a lot of thought there.
There's not a. Oh, come on, man. Let's not go there. I'm not trying to character assassinate Hillary or anything, because God forbid. But
hey, let's face it, Vince Foster deserved killing. Let's just put that out on the table and let's get that out of the way.
You mark the time. Jerold Duquette said that, not me. So just remember that. Jerold said it.
Some people need killing.
So let me. Are you surprised that Bernie Sanders is still hanging around in the race?
I am in a sense, but it's consistent with his approach. He is someone who has always been pushing from the outside like that, and throughout his campaign, he's been running against the Democratic establishment.
Yep.
So if you're running against the Democratic establishment, I guess you keep doing that, regardless of whether you're technically going to be the nominee. In fact, running against the Democratic establishment kind of guarantees you're not going to be the nominee, doesn't it?
Right.
So
you would think, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think actually winning the race was ever a serious goal.
But it's still, listen, he's still winning. He still won Oregon last week, right? I mean, Hillary won Kentucky. But I mean, and I tell you what, my perspective is he's probably one of the most honest candidates, because he's just saying he wants a revolution.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's easy to say that, isn't it? Everybody likes to hear.
I get it, right? Yeah. But he's appealing to something.
I went to the Red Sox yesterday, and in the ninth inning of a 9-0 game, the player on the Indians hit a home run. Right?
The Native Americans.
Nobody said that the Indians won the ninth inning.
Correct.
So you say that Bernie is winning primaries.
No, he won a primary.
Well, I mean, this is how this works. There's a delegate number, right? And it's a race to that number, and he's getting killed.
I heard that, yeah.
And he's losing much worse than Hillary was losing to Barack Obama. So, I mean, the reality is, yes, of course, he's going to win certain primaries.
But what's politics? Politics isn't reality. It's perception, correct?
Well, it depends on what you mean by politics, obviously.
But
the perception that he's doing well is that he's still attracting voters, and he has a base, and he has a movement, and he's is it really necessary to be that close? Man, with my voice, don't you think it will work out here?
You're over here. You just interviewed Fall City Music 2 booths away.
So he's a movement leader,
right?
More than a candidate.
Okay.
So he's winning these primaries to help his movement, not to help his delegate count.
Okay, so let me ask you questions about local races.
Oh, good, local races.
We have sheriff's race, we have a state senate race in our area, actually a couple state senate races.
Oh, right, that's right. We do have two. Yes,
we have one in Westfield, we have one here in Longmeadow. What do you think?
Well, I don't know enough about the Westfield to say anything smart.
Well, oh my God, that's the first time that stopped you.
Oh, no, correct, edit. We better edit.
That is a first.
Our Senate race, Eric Lesser
against
Chip Harrington. Chip is a classmate of mine from Cathedral. He's a great guy, very nice guy. He's making his second run at it. He switched to being a Republican, which is fairly consistent with his views. He was always a conservative Democrat. In terms of how that race will go, it's tricky. I think that Eric Lesser probably will win because he's running in a presidential year. The turnout will be useful to him. And also, I have to admit, Chip probably picked the wrong year to become a Republican. I mean, in a normal year in our area, that's not necessarily a bad thing, as you know, right? Mm-hmm. We have actually Longmeadow tends to tilt conservative in presidential elections. So
even with you living here,
right? Exactly. I've done my best, and they got the message and they ran away. So. It's hard to say how that race. I mean, I think it's fairly clear that the sitting senator, like most sitting senators, will be able to win that race. He's doing a hell of a job.
Difficult
he's very active.
To upend
it's a very difficult thing to beat an incumbent state legislator in Massachusetts. That's true.
Period.
There's no
whether
question.
You're Republican or Democrat for the most part.
Yeah, and you know what? It's funny you say that because in Western Mass we really aren't sort of partisan in the same way. Once you get elected in Western Mass, it doesn't matter what you're
correct.
You know what I mean?
It seems like that, right?
Right. So it doesn't. You're Don Humison. You're who's our state senator that's gone now?
Brian Lees.
These are guys that always had the Democratic establishment support, right? So we're a very incumbent-friendly region of the state. It's kind of funny. We always assume Massachusetts crazy liberal or partisan in the liberal or Democratic way, but the reality is in Western Mass we're just much more establishment-friendly. We're much more incumbent-friendly.
We like incumbents for
some
reason.
We really do.
We don't like what they do, but we like incumbents.
Well, I think what it is we get used to working with them in various capacities, and it's working out fine, and we don't care what their party is, and then they get to stay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think
Very
that's the way it
different, I
works.
think so, on the local level.
Yeah,
I agree with you.
yeah,
So that two
yeah.
things happened today. You
Yeah.
you didn't know anything intelligent to say about that, and I
Yeah.
agreed with you.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
We're on,
Well,
we're on a roll.
it's going to
man.
get you in trouble.
But,
but-
no kidding,
yeah,
huh?
yeah.
So the casinos come. We might as well go down there and play
Yeah,
17
hey,
black. at
now
this
we're
point
going to
in time.
gamble. Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. So what else is going on that I need to know?
That's an
You got
excellent
your-
question.
You got your finger on the pulse of almost nothing, but that's okay.
Right, right. What else is going on politically that you ought to know? That's a good question. Well, actually, you know what's going to be really interesting for Massachusetts is the possibility of ballot questions in the coming election.
Mm-hmm.
I think the most interesting one might be charter schools, right? Charter schools is a fascinating debate because it's an education debate, but there's all kinds of sort of left-right political folks that are using it as a proxy for just sort of standard left-right politics. And this, again, is in Eastern Mass, right? That's where all the action is.
Correct.
And the idea of charter schools being expanded or not being expanded, you know, that might be sort of an interesting educational policy debate. But what you see is the money that will come into the ballot question is coming from sources that have nothing to do with education.
Right.
Right? So what that tells us is that in this case, conservative, because they're pushing for charter schools, organizations like Mass Fiscal Alliance, etc. These are, you know, ideological, if not partisan organizations, and it looks like they're going to be pouring a lot of money, some of which is dark money, into the charter schools, which tells us that it's a proxy for left-right politics.
But on the flip side, you're going to see the Mass Teachers Association put a lot
Right.
of money there as well.
Well, that's
right?
exactly right.
Right.
But at least they're the Mass Teachers Association, so it's an education issue, right? That's what you expect. Why wouldn't they?
Oh, because I
Right?
think that's just. Listen, I'm on the board of a charter school, so
Oh,
no. So I understand
whether
the
they're
and
good, bad, or
right.
ugly, here and there.
So,
it's the
but I
politics.
mean, on
Yeah.
the Mass Teachers Alliance,
Yeah.
that is purely political on their end,
Well, yeah, but it's educational.
just like the Mass Fiscal Alliance.
Well, the Mass Fiscal Alliance is actually not supposed to be doing political things. It's a nonprofit. But the point is that if I'm in a union that deals with public safety, obviously it makes sense for me to be political on the issues of public safety, right? The interesting thing about charter schools is, and it may well be true on the left as well, I'm sure there's some left money out there that'll end up. The interesting thing is that we're getting donors, we're getting activists from issues that have nothing to do with education, deciding that there's something about charter schools that is worth their effort.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. That's, from my perspective, you want to ask yourself, why is that? Why are they using charter schools as a proxy for larger political issues?
Yeah, and someday we'll have the debate about the merits, because I think there's a lot of positives, that there's a lot of negatives that are thrown out there that aren't necessarily true.
Well, I certainly am not the guy to have that debate with. It's
I
not
know
my
that.
area. I don't. Yeah.
Well, then we're going to have it.
I trust whatever Paul says about that issue.
There we
oh
go,
my
folks.
God.
There we go. That's 3. We're done.
I haven't even been drinking.
That's 3. We're
Yeah.
done.
No.
Something's going to strike the 10. There's not a dark cloud in the sky, but
Yeah.
there will be.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
well, listen. In our town here, we had a very lengthy town meeting this year.
Oh, sure, we sure did.
Very
And talk
entertaining.
about a proxy for left-right politics, right?
Correct. And you have, East Longmeadow just had a change of government. They went to a charter with the town manager, expanded the council, but got rid of town meeting.
Yeah.
Do you think do you believe in Longmeadow we should have done that, or is keeping town meeting the right thing to do?
That's an excellent question. I don't know that I have decided. I like to have town meeting. There's something about the opportunity for everybody to go participate as the town's legislature. Now, we know that in terms of effectiveness, in terms of sort of turnout, there are all kinds of issues.
Right.
But in this last debate, in this last town meeting, we had essentially three gun control proposals. And what that did was it brought hundreds of people to the town meeting that don't usually show up to town
I think
meeting.
there was 1,100 people, so it means it brought about 1,000 people more than would have normally showed
yeah,
up.
well,
so.
you know what? What is it normally in the spring? 200-300?
At the most. Yeah. At the most.
So my estimate was that at least 500 people had sort of been pushed towards it, whether they'd been there before or not, because of those ordinances,
believe so,
and that was impressive.
Yep.
I in fact wrote about the NRA coordination of locals, which I thought was impressive in that they were sort of savvy, in that they advertised, but they didn't advertise, right? They didn't put out there these signs that said no gun control. They just put no on this question. And so what they did is they mobilized their supporters without awakening, any opponents, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was pretty savvy. I wrote about that in my blog for WGBH, and if you go and look now, there's 100 sort of pro-gun folks who just, very colorful comments, and I was really just sort of saying, hey, this is interesting stealth mobilization efforts, and they were very unhappy with me implying somehow that they were being stealth. I assume people who like weaponry like stealth weaponry too, but
they maybe didn't make that connection.
I don't know. It's hard to say.
And I think that when you look at, I see the pros and cons of town meeting as well, and I think there's a lot of validity to let people come and talk, and it's their one opportunity. They pay their property taxes, let them get their voices heard. On the flip side, you could work on something for 8-9 months, whether it's on the school committee, select board, and get it shot up, blown up, and the planning for a year's worth of planning is out the window.
Well, that's the downside, right?
Excuse me. Oh no, it's a downside. It's a major downside, especially when you're trying to put things forward that most people might not understand because they're not watching a meeting or something like that.
It's a classic dilemma: participation versus sort of wisdom versus consent. Right.
I'm very interested to see how this works out in the town of East Longmeadow, where the council is now essentially the town meeting.
Right.
I don't know if people really understood that when they voted on this charter change.
It will be very interesting to see.
Because they had a couple dynamics that forced that through.
Yep.
And they actually make Longmeadow look like we're running the tightest ship.
I must say, I've talked to my friends in East Longmeadow, and it really does seem very chaotic.
Yes.
Yeah, I must say that.
They have 32 people on the ballot to elect 7 town council members, and not that would be confusing in
No,
itself.
not at all.
So all in all, when you look at what's happened in Longmeadow, we're still doing pretty darn good.
Absolutely. Well, that's the other thing. I mean, we
even with us living here,
we don't have a problem with guns in Longmeadow, right? And I'm not saying that I voted for the gun control. I'm a lefty. I believe in gun safety, but the reality is that they were symbolic gestures to begin with. The idea that the symbolic gesture can draw people out to talk about a public issue, I think, is a good thing. I'm one of those people who says, hey, let's throw that symbolic issue on there to get people to show up to talk about it. While you're there, hey, let's do some town business.
Right.
The only thing I regret is that when people are drawn by these symbolic issues, they do their deal and then they get the heck out of there. And they leave the rest of us to do all the business.
When there's an override, you see 2,000 people leave, right?
And that's a shame.
Good, one side or the other, right? And it is a shame because if they listen to that,
just hang out 10 more minutes. Come on.
We passed a $62 million budget probably with 5 minutes of conversation, if that.
Right. And that's
right. $62 million
par for the course.
Just went out the window. No one even cared about, right?
And I didn't even get any of it.
I know.
So we really screwed up.
Me too. Yeah, I'm out. I'm out. There's no pension. So I want to thank Jerold for coming on. I mean, are we done?
Well, I think you're done.
Oh, we're way done. Yeah. This show's got to be canceled now that we've been on it for so long. The upside and the downside's gone.
Very good.
Thanks for watching this episode of The Upside, folks. Thanks. Have a great day, and thanks, Jerold, for coming on, man.
See you, buddy.
Appreciate it.